Einen wunderschönen guten Tag. Ich will euch unseren brandneuen Online-Kurs Selbstheilung The Journey vorstellen. The Journey ist eine Methode, die entwickelt wurde von Brandon Bays und die mittlerweile in mehr als 40 Ländern weltweit angewendet wird. Brandon Bays hat selbst einen basketballgroßen Tumor im Bauch gehabt und hat dadurch angefangen, wirklich zu forschen, welche Möglichkeiten helfen mir, um in der Seele, aber vielleicht auch körperlich heiler zu werden. Und sie hat diesen Kurs entwickelt, der heißt The Journey. Es ist eine wunderbare Methode, damit auch du mehr wieder in deine Essenz kommst und dich von alten Blockaden lösen kannst. Wir haben nun den ersten deutschsprachigen Kurs zu diesem Thema gedreht, und zwar mit der wunderbaren Bettina Halifax, die in Deutschland für dieses Thema zuständig ist. Und ich freue mich wirklich sehr, euch nun hier diesen Kurs präsentieren zu können. Und das Tolle davon, wir schenken euch sogar die ersten beiden Teile dieses Kurses, beginnend jetzt hier kostenfrei für euch mit dem ersten Teil, einer kleinen Einführung von Bettina Halifax, und dann könnt ihr Brandon Bays erst beim Interview erleben und bekommt eine wunderbare Einführung in unseren Kurs Selbstheilung The Journey. Viel Freude!
Hi und herzlich willkommen bei unserem ersten deutschsprachigen Online-Kurs für The Journey von Brandon Bays, den ich jetzt gemeinsam gerade mit der Mystica Akademie gedreht habe, und ich freue mich sehr, dich jetzt dazu einladen zu können. Das heißt, das ist ein Kurs, der besteht aus 12 verschiedenen Heilreisen, die alle dazu prädestiniert sind, dich zu unterstützen auf deiner Reise zu dir selbst, zu deiner Essenz. Das heißt, es geht um mentale Heilung, emotionale Heilung und vor allen Dingen um die Verbindung wieder zu erstellen mit dir, mit deinem wahren Selbst. Und ich freue mich, dich dort begrüßen zu dürfen.
Herzlich willkommen. Ich bin Brandon Bays, die Autorin von The Journey und auch die Entwickler von The Journey Methode. Und Sie haben wahrscheinlich gelernt, dass The Journey war geboren aus meinem eigenen Prozess, dass ich geheilt habe von einem riesengroßen Tumor. Und es ist wirklich wert, das benutzt werden über die ganze Welt. Wir geben The Journey Seminaren in 39 Ländern, und ich bin wahnsinnig dankbar, dass endlich wir ein Online-Programm geben können hier in Deutschland auf Deutsch. Bettina Halifax ist die Organisator und auch sie ist die Präsenterin, das für viele Jahre die Journey gegeben hat hier in Deutschland. Und sie ist voll von Präsenz, und ich bin immer sehr privilegiert, dass sie mit mir präsentiert, The Journey Intensive. Und sie ist voll von Liebe und ist sehr tief in ihr Selbst. Und sie werden, wenn sie das Programm nehmen, es ist in 12 Teilen gemacht werden, damit du täglich den tiefsten Prozess machen können und jeden Tag mit dich selbst arbeiten kann, mit den Präsenteren für Deutschland. Und so, ich bin sehr froh, dass du dieses ganze Programm machen würdest. Du wirst unglaublich froh sein, dass du es gemacht hast, dass du ein Geschenk für dich selbst gegeben hast. Weil mit der Journey kommst du zu Hause, zu der Liebe innerlich, zu dem Bewusstsein. Und von dieser tiefsten Ebene, dann wirst du alles erklären, loslassen, dass du wirklich in der Freiheit leben kannst.
Wir werden gleich ein bisschen über The Journey nochmal genauer sprechen, wie diese Methode funktioniert.
Ja.
Aber spannend ist natürlich deine eigene Geschichte, denn du musstest ja selber dich erstmal auf den Weg begeben.
Ja,
und es fing aber an, eigentlich warst du eine glückliche Frau, du hast einen Mann, du hattest Erfolg im Beruf, es war eigentlich alles okay.
Ja, es war perfekt eigentlich.
Es war perfekt sogar.
Ja.
Aber was geschah dann? Was passierte?
Ja, ich war sogar schon in diese komplementär, wie sagt man das auf Deutsch?
Komplementär Medizin,
Und ich habe so viele Accreditations.
Ausbildungen.
Ausbildungen. Ja. Und so. Ich bin ein Kinesiologist, a medical hypnotist, NLP Master Therapist, a psychologist. I worked in massage, a master herbalist, and also in nutrition. So ich habe so viele Diplomas in this area. And when I was 39 years old, I ended up moving from New York City to Malibu, California. And at that time, I was a therapist in all these fields. And I'd also met Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins was 24 years old at that time, and his greatest passion in life.
Ja, einer der berühmtesten Bewusstseinstrainer weltweit, muss man wirklich sagen.
Yeah. And his greatest passion at the age of 24 years old was health. And mine was too. And so I ended up going on the road with Tony, and I became a presenter for him, teaching what he called the Living Health Program, where I taught people how to eat in such a way it cleanses the body, how to breathe in such a way it oxygenates. So very practical.
So you know all these things.
Yes. So the reason I'm saying all this, I was living, breathing, doing everything that I believed in. Vegetarian, 70% fresh and raw fruits and vegetables, 30% of it cooked, working out every day, meditating every day since I was 19 years old, doing yoga every day. And as you said, more important than all of this, in a marriage I felt deeply blessed to be in. And so the last thing I ever expected to have happen was for my tummy to start to grow. And I just didn't want to believe it can't be happening. After all, I'm doing everything right, And I so much didn't want to believe it was happening to me. And I'm not proud of this, but I'm sure you know this, that all therapists at Train never go into denial. And I so much didn't want to believe it was happening to me that when it got too big for me to zip up my trousers, I started wearing the long flowing dresses that were popular at that time. I just didn't want to face the fact that my tummy was growing. And one morning I was sitting for meditation, and I'd been meditating for 20 years. And you know how sometimes in meditation, the mind just winds down and it falls into the background. And I was just resting in a thought-free stillness. And out of nowhere came a gut knowing. I might be seriously ill, and I need to get real and get myself to an orthodox medical doctor so I could have the test done. And when I came out of that meditation, I was just overwhelmed with shame. I thought, wow, what a fraud you are, Brandon. You teach 6,000 people at a time how to create radiant health, and you might be seriously ill? And I felt so much shame, and conversely, so much pride in all my diplomas and certifications in all these fields. I couldn't bring myself to call up my best friend, who was going to the kind of medical doctor I needed to go to. And instead, I did the chicken shit way out. I went to the local bookshop, and I picked out a book written by a surgeon who did not recommend hysterectomies. And when I called the number at the back of the book, I spoke to the nurse, and she said, "Do you know who this surgeon is?" And I said, "No, I just found a book." And she said, "She works for the California State Board of Medicine. You couldn't get in to see her for 6, maybe 8 months." And I said, I didn't know. If there's a cancellation, will you call me? And she says, well, it's not likely. And I put the phone down. And again, just burning in shame. 3 days later, she called me and she said there was an appointment available, cancellation came through in several weeks' time, and did I want it? And I said, yes, please, thank you. And I didn't know the nature of the tumor. I don't know what yours was like. But when I finally got to see the oncologist, she said it probably started as 1 cell when you were 8 years old and replicated to 2 cells. But towards the end, it started growing aggressively and exponentially. And I looked about 6 months pregnant, though I knew I wasn't. And at the end of this very graphic exam, she took me to her consultation room. And she started telling me my prognosis. And she said, Brandon, haven't you noticed you're breathing shallowly? It's because it's grown all the way from here into your diaphragm, and it's crushing your organs. And this bleeding that's happening is not your monthly courses. This is because you're internally bleeding, and you need to get to the hospital today and find out, is it benign, is it malignant? But it's not going to matter. You're going to have it surgically removed. And I was sitting there in shock, and you would have thought, with all my background, I would have taken that news with some sort of calm. But the truth was, my mind was going 1,000,000 miles a minute, and my heart was pumping through the roof. And I said, listen, I'm in the alternative health field. I'm trained in kinesiology and homeopathy and in herbs, in cleanses, and medical hypnosis and all of this. I said, if I can, through one of my techniques, get the bleeding to stop, how much time can you give me? And she said to me, Brandon, you chose me because I practice integrative medicine. And that's who I work with now these days. I work with medical doctors who practice integrative medicine. And she said, attach to this clinic, we provide people with acupuncture, herbs, cleanses. We do homeopathy. We have yoga. We have meditation. And she said, if I thought you could go that route, that is the first route I would recommend for you. She said, but look at all these case studies and all these books. There's never been a woman who's been diagnosed with a mass as large as you, the size of a basketball, who's healed herself. And so you're going to need to get real and get into hospital today. We had another 45-minute conversation, And I got her to agree that if I could get the bleeding to stop over the next 3 days, she would give me 1 month. But if I weren't significantly healed in a month's time, then she needed to do what she knew how to do, which was surgically remove it. I can remember so clearly. I'm a New Yorker, as you know, but I was in downtown LA where her offices, where her clinic was, and I had finally asked my best friend to come with me. And so we left her offices, and at this point, my heart's thumping so hard, and my mind, it's like I would talk about a monkey mind, And I looked up, and in front of me, there was this mimosa tree with blossoms, golden blossoms that looked like golden rain. And when I looked at that tree, I had what is classically called a sartori, a moment, where time stops and becomes timeless. And I looked at that tree and I was absolutely arrested by the beauty of this tree that had blossoms like golden rain. And as I looked at this tree, my racing thinking mind started to wind down, and it fell into the background. And out of nowhere, waves of gratitude came. Gratitude just to see the color yellow, to smell a fragrance I'd not smelled going into her offices. Gratitude for just being allowed to breathe. And as I stood there, riveted in that timeless moment, out of nowhere came a gut knowing. Somehow, I would be guided to heal. And even though I didn't have a clue how that would be, I was so grateful because I was already living, breathing, doing everything that was available out there. I was so grateful at that time for all the work going on in the field of cellular healing, and specifically for the work of Deepak Chopra, and for all in the healing clinic that I worked in New York City, where I'd seen people who the medical field had given up on, who'd healed without drugs or surgery. And I knew if only one person was capable of cellular healing, it meant it's possible for the human anatomy. And I was also grateful for the work going on in the field of cellular healing. And Chopra, many of you know who Chopra is, and at that time, he was not the guru he's become today. He was a chief surgeon general in a hospital in Boston. And what he did was a radical thing at that time. He decided to amass case studies of people who had healed without drugs or surgery. And the reason this was so radical is because all of us, whether you're in the medical field or you were in the alternative field, we've all been trained the same way. You look at the symptoms that lead to ill health, that lead to death. We were all focused on what makes people die. But Chopra says we know enough about that.
Yeah, but what is the inner world? What are the experiences?
What makes those people who did not have drugs or surgery heal against the odds? And he amassed hundreds of case studies, and eventually thousands. And he could find that they only had two qualities in common. One was that through some act of grace or spontaneous event, they actually got access to this that he called the cell memory. And the reason I'm speaking in English is because I want to be able to share the science about this, is what we know about the cells inside the body is they all replicate at varying speeds. So for instance, if you've ever had a suntan, I'm sure you have, how many of you have noticed it actually, it faded away in 3 weeks' time? That's because old cells slough off and are replaced by new regenerative cells. Liver cells take 6 weeks, stomach lining less than 3 days. And the one that just blows my mind are the eye cells, because do you know that in less than 2 days, in less than 48 hours, you will have an all-new inner eyeball?
Wow.
And the only way I could put this into a context was that my mom, she had one of those eye operations, you know, where they slit her eye open, inserted a lens, put the flap back and put a patch on. And a day and a half later, not even 2 days later, she could see clearly. As a matter of fact, there won't be a single molecule in your body a year from now that was here today. But Chopra asked a question no one else was asking at that time. He said, well, why is it if you look at a liver that's riddled with cancer in January, why would it be riddled with cancer in June? Good question to ask, isn't it? And what he postulated at that time, which is only subsequently been verified by scientists working both in the American military and in Russian military, is stored inside that degenerative cell are these old repressed cell memories, where I spoke about earlier that when you felt a strong emotion and you repressed it, it released the biochemistry, and it literally went to cell receptors and blocked them. And that old consciousness, that cell memory, got stored. And before that cell generation died, it passed on its programming and its cell memory to the next cell generation. So the next cell generation were born as an exact replica of the previous cell generation. And so that's why when you look at a liver that's riddled with cancer in January, Chopra asked, well, why would it be riddled with cancer in June? And it's because this programming got passed on from one cell generation to the next. And what he found was, with all the thousands of case studies of people who had healed without drugs or surgery, they had two qualities in common. One was that through some act of grace or spontaneous event, they actually got access to this that he called the infinite intelligence. Yeah. Wow. The part of you that makes your heart beat and your eyes shine and your hair grow. This vast field of love that is your essence. And the second thing that they had in common was spontaneously they got access to these cell memories. And if somehow they released what was stored there in the cells, when the new cells were born, they were born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. Now, I knew all this.
Interesting. Yeah.
I knew all this.
Yeah.
I'd studied with Chopra. I was at the cutting edge of what was happening in the field of cellular healing. And I could tell you something. You can know all the science on the planet.
Read all the books. And,
read all the books. See all the case studies with your own eyes. But unless you have a method, it's no more than a bunch of words on a piece of paper and a real place of inspiration. And yet when I looked at that mimosa tree and time stopped and I got a gut knowing, somehow I would be guided.
You
to uncover
from this one
to how to open into the infinite intelligence and how to get access to the cell memories. And so my great journey that I am every day grateful for is that spontaneously I did learn how to open into this infinite intelligence and how to get access to cell memories. And how to release the stored consciousness there, come to understanding and forgiveness and letting go so that when the new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness. And it was 6.5 weeks later that I had the 43 scans done in hospital. And I was pronounced textbook perfect, clean, completely tumor-free. So the reason I wanted to share the science behind that is up until this point, and I still don't know any method other than the journey that can directly open you into this vast, boundless field of love, of truth. Not as a pretty notion or a concept or I had an experience of peace and meditation.
The field is always there.
Yes,
you know,
directly
it's just a remembering maybe.
In this field. An opening directly into the field. And it's that deepest level, from that place, that all of journey work happens. And that's why it's so prevalently used by medical doctors around the world. I've trained many, hundreds of medical doctors. And why it's used by Ministry of Educations and even ministries of government. As a matter of fact, if you have work-related stress and you work for the Dutch government in Holland, and the only clinic they will send you to is one that offers journey work. I mean, you can pay to go to any, but the government will pay their own government employees to go because the journey is known to getting to the emotional root cause. Of what has put the surface stress in place. And I'd say, honestly, Thomas, that I would say that really 90% of the people that come to the journey don't have a physical illness. They just have a longing
it's for
to come home.
To come home.
To come home and to clear whatever blocks them or shuts them down or holds them back to live.
It's a wonderful way for consciousness, for
to
awakening,
live from
being really
So it's really about coming home to the deepest truth of your own essence. And at that deepest level, having the tools to clear whatever blocks you.
Great, wonderful. It's very interesting in some ways. In my personal way, I also had cancer. We stay in English, I think. We talk in English now.
Okay,
it's fine.
Yeah.
And when I was 24 years, and I had also this moment of just fell into the anger and why me, and so, and I felt, and then I landed into this love field, in this just being, and just beautiful. And also I was in this consciousness. I know, okay, I could be healthy, it's fine, I do all what I can do. From this point on, I realized that we all have this deep freedom inside ourselves.
So
that
true.
We are, that's all one. Yeah.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
we can't find words for these things.
No.
Many spiritual teachers talk about these things. It has to do with awakening. But on the other hand, everyone has the possibility to get into this freedom.
Yes.
I realized in this moment.
Yes.
And my journey also was another, of course, but this is what many people have together who are in deep suffering. There is a point, and then you are in freedom, and you know, okay, fine. And then I go, and then I look what happens.
Yeah. I was in Tel Aviv, and the Ministry for Education decided that they were going to undergo this whole journey for a year. So learning the work of the journey over a year's time. And the reason it was different, and the reason I'm saying yes to exactly what you said, is that usually when I work with the Ministry for Education in a country, we teach the teachers and they give it to the kids. But in Israel, they decided, we're not going to have our teachers undergo work unless we in the government have experienced that.
That's great.
And at the end of a year's training, I went to the ministry offices in Tel Aviv, and there were the 40 ministers, you know, the ministers of the high schools, the ministers of psychology, the ministers of who the principals were and headmasters were, the ministers of grade schools, each of the, you know, they were the head for the whole of the country. There were 40 of them, Minister of Finance. And, you know, the head minister, she said to me, Brandon, I don't want you to say anything yet. I just want you to listen. And one woman, she said over the years she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and had healed without drugs or surgery. And another, she had a very acrimonious divorce. And even though it was very acrimonious, she found a peace inside of herself. But the one who touched me the most was something similar to what you said, where she said, Brandon, I've been walking these ministries' halls for 18 years, and I had so much anger. I've been so stressed out, and I wouldn't even look people in the eye. I wouldn't shalom to them, which is their greeting, which means peace. I'd get home. I have 8 children at home because they're replacing those lost during the Holocaust. And she said, and I'm stressed out to the max. I get home, my children come late for dinner, and every single dinner I'm shouting at my children. And the next day I get into work, and all I do is go to committee meetings and I argue with people. And she said I'd come to hate myself. My life was a life of just anger. She said I did my very first journey process. And she did what you did. And she said, I got to the emotional root cause of what had put that surface anger in place. And she said, then I went on a journey inside my body, and I got to the cell memories that had been the catalyst for this impulse of anger. And she said, I cleared it out at that deepest level. And that night I came home. And of course, my children, late for dinner again. And of course, their food had gone cold again. And she said, I thought to myself, who cares? If it's cold food, it's still healthy. You know, I've got 8 healthy, beautiful children. And she said, my youngest said to me at the end of dinner, she said, Mommy, where did all the anger go? And she said, the next day I got into the committee meeting. And for the first time, I started looking people in the eyes. And she had, the people had the same shining eyes that I knew I had. And we got more done at that committee meeting, because they'd all had their journey processes, than we had gotten done at the last 10 committee meetings. And the reason I love her story is because we always think that I'll never get, you know, to the bottom of this anger, this stress,
or
this sadness or loneliness. And yet in the very first process she did, she got to the emotional root cause and so finished with it.
So, I mean, that's the secret. When we go through, we realize there is nothing. It's away, and then it's just freedom here.
Yeah, freedom is here. And in the journey, we let that freedom then guide us to the cell memories.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Yeah,
how is the journey, how can we describe what the journey means? So in 2 or 3 steps for the people.
Yes, well, what you spoke about so eloquently, that it begins with, the first part is about getting real. And opening into your emotions. And as you begin to go from a more surface motion, you will find that there's actually deeper and deeper layers of emotions. And eventually, spontaneously, unexpectedly, you end up opening into a vast field of love, of freedom. And you realize it's been there all along, but we, all of us, we buy into the layers that cover it. And then if you're very lucky, you fall so in love with the truth inside of you that you're willing to go on a journey inside the body and actually go to certain cellular locations and uncover those old repressed cell memories and go through that very deep process of, first of all, opening into those old cell memories that are buried inside and releasing the stored consciousness, the pain, the shame, the blame, the hurt, you know, the devastation, the loneliness. Go through that process of releasing it and then coming to a place of understanding. And then there's a point where you're given an invitation to forgive. And in my direct living experience, there's a great mysterious power in forgiveness. There's a reason it's part of every single religion that I've had the privilege to dive into, is that when we forgive life, God, other people,
our parents,
ourselves, something happens. That's when we let go of that old pain. And then that's when the cells are releasing and finishing with the story of pain. Because we drag around these stories our whole life long. And so that when new cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness. And, you know, when I, you know, first uncovered the cell memory, now, of course, it was a cell memory I already knew about. You know, of extreme, brutal, violent abuse as a child. Now, as a therapist, of course, I thought that I so long since had that handled. But it's almost like, and the best way I can describe it, in the Sunday Times in Britain, they had a cartoon where they describe what the journey is and does. And they show this woman carrying this big bag of all of her garbage. And it's raining outside, and she's walking up a mountain, you know, and carrying this bag. And in my case, what was my garbage? What was my baggage? Me and my story. Oh, I've come to accept my violent past. I have compassion for it. I have understanding, but I'm dragging this story of me and my pain. Now she gets to the top of, it was a 2-page cartoon in the Sunday Times, you know, in Britain, a very intelligent newspaper. And she gets to the top of the hill, and on the other side of the hill, she's dropped the baggage. And it said at the top, the power of forgiveness. And she forgave. That's when she let go of her story of me and my pain. And when she started going down the hill, the sun was shining, the birds were chirping, rainbows, and she's skipping down the hill. And that to me is the healing power of forgiveness. Up until, you know, I was nearly 40 years old, oh, I accept my violent past. I'm a therapist, I understand it. I'm compassionate, I'm a noble person, I can understand it. It's all bullshit. You know, it's only when you open your heart and you wholly forgive. And it hurt to do that, I have to tell you. Because I'd created this noble identity of Brandon, the noble therapist, who come to accept her violent past. And I had to face down 30 years of pride, dressed up as compassion. And it hurt to face down that much pride. But eventually I realized my life depended on it. And I opened my heart, and I wholeheartedly, absolutely, completely forgave. And it was while I was forgiving I realized that tumor had never been clinging to me. I'd been clinging to it. And 30 years of a blame game, dressed up as compassion, but 30 years of a blame game was finally over. And so that's why I'm including that the journey is both a method for awakening, for sure, in a bow-defining way, into the infinite intelligence, into this vast field of love. But it's also about coming to completion with your karma, with the vasanas, the karmic imprints that are stored in our cells. And when I first shared it with Punjaji, Papaji, a master who has been very influential in my
many
own
other spiritual teachers also who were with him.
Yes, And he was very influential, and I took the journey to him. And he said to me, he gave me the spiritual name Janaki. It means unborn, or born of the self. He's told me to remain unborn, to not take up residence anywhere as anything. And it's also the goddess Sita, pervading all of existence. And he said, Janaki, this is the new energy medicine. And what you're helping people deal with is there are some samskaras, the karmas that they brought in with them, and the vasanas, the tendencies that are stored, the themes that they're facing in their life. And you know, when I first came here to Munich, and when was it, to Bettina? 2005. I came here to Munich, and there was a man at the Journey Intensive. We were in Fürstenfeldbruck.
Fürstenfeldbruck.
Yeah.
I was born in Fürstenfeldbruck, besides
Oh
that.
my God! Well, anyway, we were 240 people in Fürstenfeldbruck, in the Ratshaus, I believe that's where we were. And one man said that on the second day of the Journey Intensive, he went inside his heart and he said, Brandon, I don't have anything wrong with my heart. He said, but when I went inside, the cell memory I uncovered wasn't my own. It was my mother's, and she was in the concentration camps in World War II. But he said, I was born post-World War II, And she went, shh, dum. We don't talk about this.
Yeah.
And he said, part of what I needed to do was to release all her stored pain. And in living color, I experienced what she went through in those concentration camps, the horror, the devastation, the terror she experienced. And I had to release it all. And he said, and at the end, when I finally came to a place of forgiveness, he said, I realized that even though up until this point I'd never known what my mother had experienced, I'd been born and I felt like I had a lid over my life. That I wasn't, because of whatever she went through, and I didn't know what that was, I did not have permission to be free, to be joyous, to make mistakes, to get it wrong, to be crazy, to be wild, to, you know, and I asked, well, how many of you in the room feel this way? Born post-World War II like me, and they all raised their hands. And then I looked at my own life, and my mother grew up in Vienna, Austria, and her first husband, he was a photojournalist taking pictures and was shot down by the Luftwaffe. And so my brother, Michael, was born without a father. And her father was put into a Nazi prison in another country and shot through the head. And so she ended up marrying an American soldier, my father, first lieutenant for the American Army, stationed there in Vienna. Moved to New York. I grew up in New York. Now, she refused to speak any German. So the only time I heard German was when they would argue in German. That was that secret language, which I didn't know what it was. But just like this guy, my mother went, stumm.
Wow.
We don't talk about it. I didn't even know my grandfather's name. I didn't know about my brother's father, anything. I didn't actually find out all of it until about 6 years ago. But one of the things I realized that I'd grown up with is I'd grown up with a lid in a country that's supposedly all about freedom. America is supposedly all about freedom. But I realized I'd grown up with a lid over my life. And I realized I was coming here to Germany and to the European countries, not only to serve in the healing and the awakening that needs to happen, but for my own healing and awakening. I mean, let's say someone who's listening to this, a friend of yours has been diagnosed with, let's say, breast cancer. What is the first question the oncologist asks? By the way, my sister's an oncologist. The first question they ask is, who in your family has cancer?
Yeah.
Now, we've known for a long time that the physical propensity for illness and disease gets passed on genetically. But recently in the last decade, and it's so interesting, you can see it all over the web, just Google it, they have discovered what was emotionally experienced in World War II has been passed down to all the next generations, and that emotional experience is much of what we are clearing in the journey work.
Thank you very much for these wonderful stories and your talking about. It's a kind of collective movement, I think, more and more.
Ja. Und so, ich hoffe, dass du eine wunderbare Zeit hast und ich hoffe, dass einmal ich dir kennenlernen würde, persönlich, wenn ich komme einmal im Jahr nach Deutschland und hoffentlich einmal werde ich dir auch sehen. Und ein herzliches Namaste.
Ja, das war der erste Teil von The Journey, sozusagen ein einführender Teil. Wenn es euch gefallen hat, ich freue mich immer über ein Gefällt mir oder vielleicht wollt ihr den Kanal abonnieren. Hier auf diesem Kanal, wisst ihr sicher, gibt es hunderte weitere Interviews mit interessanten Persönlichkeiten, unter anderem natürlich auch mit Bettina Halifax und in Kürze auch mit Brandon Bays. So. Ich habe ein schönes Geschenk für euch. Wir haben für euch auch den zweiten Teil kostenlos. Der zweite Teil, der tatsächlich mit der ersten Heilreise beginnt, geleitet von Bettina Halifax. Dazu geht einfach auf unsere Akademie. Herzlich willkommen dort. Da findet ihr auch Probelektionen anderer Kurse. Und insofern schon jetzt ganz viel Freude beim zweiten Teil von The Journey mit Bettina Halifax.